Hey, it's Soul with another video. Is Battle for Azeroth going to suck? As in, is it like filler, like Warlords of Draenor was? It sort of seems like a silly question, doesn't it? Maybe it is, but it's a question being seriously asked. Today I'm going to leave my opinion, and you're more than free to disagree. Now, I am excited for Battle for Azeroth, but I'm not trying to defend it here. It might suck. Maybe even more than Warlords of Draenor. But I don't think it's going to be because they're similar. Anyway, let me get started. So it's thanks to Warlords of Draenor, which is historically the least favored World of Warcraft expansion by many metrics, that expansion announcements are viewed with equal parts hype and skepticism, even doubt. Just what compels the conversation that equates BFA, I'll call it BFA, to Warlords? I'm going to go into two main points, the story and premise, and the gameplay systems. Let's start with the story and the whole point of Warlords of Draenor and Battle for Azeroth. The big argument is that these are, quote, filler expansions for the real, meaty expansion that's going to come later. Their premise is that the stories from these expansions end up amounting to nothing, as if they never had to happen in the first place. Although I think we can say that for literally every expansion, but that's beside the point. Warlords is accused of being just a filler to bring the players to the Legion storyline, and, I can see where they're coming from here now that we can look back. Think of the good people over in Azeroth just hanging out, getting drunk, doing their thing, when all of a sudden, brown orcs are pouring through the dark portal and they're attacking Azeroth. The Iron Horde broke through and made it as far as Blackrock Mountain, where they were effectively contained and then eventually wiped out. As far as normal people on Azeroth are concerned, that's it, that's the story. In a way, for Azeroth, this is the longest period of there being nothing going on. But it's too early to call Battle for Azeroth filler, because unlike Warlords, we can't look back on it yet. We don't know how the story is going to play out. There's definitely a number of people out there who are upset that we won't immediately be confronting the Old God and Voidlord prophecies, but odds are that eventually we will. Sorry that they're not the star of the show this time around, we'll just have to settle for Azeroth, the planet at the center of this entire Warcraft franchise. And using the term filler implies a lack of impact on the overall story. The apparent destruction of capital cities that have been familiar to us players for over a decade isn't what I'd write off as filler. It's more than just spectacle, unless, by the end of the BFA storyline, that we find that the Night Elf and Forsaken capitals are suddenly and magically restored. Then, I'll have words. Getting to more direct comparisons though, the entire Warlords of Draenor story takes place on another planet, with no lasting effect other than what I mentioned previously. By the end of just the prologue of Battle for Azeroth, two capitals have been effectively cratered, and two faction leaders are going to be left facing off head to head. Speaking for myself here, just like I'm speaking for myself in this entire video, I like that Battle for Azeroth's initial premise is to draw a very clear line between the Alliance and Horde conflict. Warlords gave us Ashran, an island that the Alliance and Horde are fighting for something, I forget what. But the narrative of the Alliance versus Horde in Warlords made no sense, since it had nothing to do with the reasons why we were in Draenor in the first place. This first part of the Battle for Azeroth has the Horde and Alliance conflict front and center. We don't have the timeline and all the reasons that we got to this point, but there's still a foundation to the story. I'll be curious to see the player behaviors when these factions want to go at each other's hubs, which, if you look historically, may be the least accessible that they've ever been. And that's not even considering the layout or construction of our faction hubs, which I'm sure just isn't ready yet. If and when the enemy faction is at your doorstep though, you can bet that they're motivated to be there. Inevitably though, I expect the narrative to eventually just move past this Horde and Alliance war. I don't expect or want the Horde and Alliance to suddenly join hands and work together, but we'll likely see more of, the usual setting aside of their differences, because hey, Naga and sea monsters and maybe the threat of endless darkness are getting in the way. That's the game side of WoW, and its desire for longevity getting in the way of the fantasy of the story. It just can't be helped. People who are expecting the expansion to come to some sort of fantastic conclusion like the Alliance winning and subjugating the Horde, you've got to understand that in a scenario like that, would you really want that kind of gameplay? I don't think Horde players will like it at all if they saw on their list of expansion features that their faction, its leaders, and the capitals were going away, and that their starting experience will be, in jail. What would Alliance players do? Play internment camp garrison simulator thing while the Horde play guerrilla war scenarios for 2 years? That sounds more like a single player game with multiple perspectives than an MMO. Obviously, splitting gameplay so unevenly is just the foundation of short-sighted MMO design. Anyway, let's move on to gameplay. The argument here is that because BFA is filler, it's coming with just a few system changes and features, while the real expansion down the line will have some groundbreaking cool stuff. This already feels like a shaky argument though. If something's ready to go and it doesn't get in the way of anything, why not just do it? A couple of features I can name off that were introduced after an expansion's launch include mythic dungeons, flexible raids, time-walking events, PvE matchmaking, and later in Legion we're going to get a full-level revamp and a battleground. Expansions are about some new bells and whistles, but I don't think it's great planning to hold on to features just so your expansion reveal could be that much cooler. On the other end of things though, features like artifact weapons probably wouldn't feel like they were in the right place if they were introduced with the Broken Shore patch. That's why you would consider something like artifact weapons or class orders as a core feature of an expansion. At any rate, we're still on shaky ground to make real comparisons because we only have one of two complete expansion experiences to draw upon. So we'll go with whatever we know about Battle for Azeroth and compare that with what we've got in the first few months of Warlords of Draenor. Battle of Azeroth might start with 10 dungeons at launch if Blizzard sticks to their plans. This is regardless of whether these launch dungeons are unlocked through a questline, by the way. Just like Legion, Battle for Azeroth crushes Warlords dungeons with not just the number of dungeons, but more importantly, their depth and replayability thanks to Mythic Keystones. Mythic difficulty in dungeons didn't happen until later in Warlords. The early reality was that players had very few incentives to complete dungeons after the LFR version of Highmaul was introduced. Raid-wise, WoD was announced with 2 raids at launch but ended up having 1 raid until the following year. And 1 raid so far has been announced for BFA, along with the expectation that we'll confront Queen Ashara at some point. There's not too much more to say here, so I'll move on. Critics argue that BFA will have too little content and nothing to do, that there isn't anything new to be brought to the table. This is going to be another Warlords and long-lived classic WoW. That's a joke, by the way. With content, I'm going to split it up into offline and online content. As of now, BFA has no offline content, no garrison, no order hall, no farm, no magical love boat kind of thing. There's basically no method of switching from alt to alt and collecting gold or goodies this time around. From the announcement, we know that World Quest will return in BFA, and there will be a war campaign, similar to Legion's class campaign and Warlord's garrison campaign that's going to help remind players that there is, in fact, a story. Think what we will of the World Quest system, but from it comes the undisputed fact that it is designed to get players out into the world. Warlords, meanwhile, boast what I would argue as the least amount of outdoor content in WoW's history, while giving many powerful incentives for players to stay hunkered down in their garrison that, in hindsight, the garrison was designed to discourage players from going out into the world. Looking back, farming for like Scryer Rep or Primal Shadow was a test of wills, but there were reasons to do it. Warfronts and island expeditions add more activities to the BFA arsenal of content, arguably making BFA feature more different activity types than any other expansion. And of course, these new features might suck, just like it was predicted that Ashran might suck, but they're still platforms for things to do, and they do deserve that much credit. In BFA, players will be completing all sorts of different activities for Azerite, which is another long-tail progression system like Artifact Power. Players in early Warlords farmed for Apexis crystals until shortly after the LFR version of Highmaul was released, and then from there the best ways to gear were through raids and the occasional garrison mission cache. The point I'm trying to make with spouting all this nonsense is that there's very little in common between BFA and WoD. Battle for Azeroth is the product of lessons learned from the past with a strong premise on story and a host of activities to complete. But after experiencing Legion and seeing what Battle for Azeroth has in store so far, I consider myself hyped, skeptical, and eager to learn more. Please like this video and subscribe for more on Battle for Azeroth and all things World of Warcraft. Share your thoughts in a comment below, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.